want to move on to the final topic, market diversification. So this is a topic for everybody in the room. I mean, I was posted out in Germany for 4.5 years, so I'm well aware of clients looking to enter into new markets, particularly since 2016. Libby, I might come over to you on this one. So you're a relatively small to medium-sized company, but you have 15%, is that right, of your business outside of what you classify as the domestic market of Ireland and Northern Ireland?
About that, and I suppose we were a classic case of having the wool or the rug pulled out from under ourselves. In 2016, at the time of the Brexit vote, we were negotiating with financial institutions for money for an expansion, and of course our primary concern was supplying the domestic market, which we weren't able to supply fully up until then, but we were really looking beyond to the export market, and mainland UK would have been the obvious first step. So we went ahead with our expansion, and in 2017 got to the point where we had enough beer to keep Ireland happy and could look beyond. And we very quickly decided to simply divert our gaze to the continent. So we never put any effort into the UK and haven't built up a market there. But it has led us to Italy and to France, and we're making very good progress there, and also in the Netherlands. So in many ways for us it has been a positive, just as you ended the story, Tara. We would be a good example of where Brexit has made us think twice about what we're going to do and our market diversification.
Do you have a message for the room, for clients who might be in a similar type of situation as yourself, or of a similar scale? I mean, 15% is not insignificant in terms of your business. So, like, what kind of advice would you be giving people who'd be looking into the EU?
I suppose look beyond the obvious, and I think I think we have very good friends in the EU. A lot of customers at every level there really appreciate the difficulties that Ireland is confronting, and they're there to support us. And I think in many ways it's as good a time as any to be trying to send an Irish product into the continental European market. So I would, and nobody is really too small. There is a market there, and the Irish food and drink is so prized, I suppose, on the continent. It's really worth remembering.
From a Borbia point of view, of someone who's been in markets for, I suppose, about 5 years now, is do your homework beforehand. Find out what as Larry has described, the known knowns. Find out what is the market intelligence that you need to focus on a market, rather than closing your eyes and pointing on a map. But actually, we're here as well to help. We have loads of services in terms of this facility here, but also in market, bringing you on the journey of identifying the right markets for your product proposition and how best to diversify into other markets. I want to bring Philip in here. From the meat side, we discussed recent market access to USA, China. I think also the recent trade mission to Japan was I heard, a successful one in terms of getting new relationships there. So maybe you can talk us through a little bit on that on the beef side.
Yeah, well, market access and diversification is nothing new to the meat sector, really. And while we export on the beef side 52% or thereabouts to the UK, it's far less in terms of sheep meat and pig meat, proportionately. But you can see the logic in exporting that volume to the UK, because that's, the taste characteristics are there in both markets. They're similar. The culture is similar. And of course, geographically, it makes absolute sense to be exporting where you want to be. If you go back to 1995, 96, we were probably exporting 50% of our beef to third countries. Now we're exporting almost 90%, both to the EU and to the UK. And these are higher value markets than we would ever have got in the past from third countries. So that's important. But with the good work and the good relationship that we have with Borbia and with the department, we have secured incredible success, I think, over the last couple of years. And it's up to the industry to exploit that success by way of exporting product to those markets. But what is important for the beef industry in particular is to have a wide spread of markets across the world that you can use when opportunities allow for that to happen. And much of that is dependent on currency shifts and political stability and various other aspects that impinge on that. China was opened last year for, I think now 7 companies. It's not a completely open market. When you negotiate free trade agreements, as they say, it takes 2 to tango. And you know, while we will always want to have market access in as many countries as we possibly can around the globe, political factors enter that equation, trade issues arise, and it isn't in all cases that countries want to trade with you. I was in China in 2005 when we opened a pig meat market, and we started the process immediately from then in attempting to open the beef market, and it has taken this long. And it's not because we didn't put the effort in, it's because the other side weren't willing to play ball with us. The US is potentially a valuable market, and we have to utilize that. And these are good markets to have if we do face the hard Brexit scenario that we could well be facing. Japan equally, because now there's a trade agreement with the European Union in Japan, and we can use that opportunity. And there was a successful visit to South Korea as well. And that there are prospects there also. So all of that, and particularly I should mention lamb, because we are now in a process to open up the lamb market into China as well. So these are all very important markets, and we work hard on them. Can I just go back very quickly, because I don't want to leave here without mentioning on the financial resilience. I agree with what has been said about hedging currency. There's nothing Brexit related about hedging sterling. You know, that's, anybody who's been in that market has been hedging for sterling for many, many years. But what has been said about that is extremely important. I think what's important is that there should be a policy that companies should not become financial gurus and speculating on the financial markets. They should be looking after the interests of their business in developing hedging strategies. The other thing, though, I would want to say particularly about financial resilience is there's very little that anybody can do if we face the level of tariffs that we're talking about. And Rob talked about them there earlier. These are significant tariffs, even though they are about 53%, I think, of the EU external tariffs that are there at the moment. These are extremely challenging in terms of putting product into that market. And Tara talked about DDP is a deliver duty paid. She mentioned that earlier. That's the kind of ask that is coming on sectors exporting to the UK. And interestingly, I think what Sharon mentioned earlier is a good insight into what the mindset might be on the part of UK retailers also. And what Sharon said was that her concern from an Irish retail perspective is not to have inflation on consumers, which is laudable, absolutely. We're hearing the same out of the UK. Now, what does that mean for an exporter? It means that you have to carry the duty because we don't want to increase the prices on consumers. And how do you get that back? You get that back through maybe some form of competitiveness, some cost sharing. But ultimately, there's very little way in which you can get that back unless there is a trade agreement. And the risk of not having that also, and most particularly in the case of meat, is that if the Mercosur countries are trading at the current EU external tariff rate, they will actually get a benefit from paying the UK, the new UK rate. On the other hand, Ireland will get a massive hit. So not only will we face the tariff wall, but we'll face stiff competition also.
You want to come in there, Larry?
I do. I just want to add a comment to Philip's remarks, if I may. And obviously Tara spoke about DDP earlier. Let's be clear. I've already said that the food industry generates between 1% and 5% PBT, and I'm sure there are exceptions to that. In fact, I know there's a few, but not that many. So 1% to 5% profit before tax is, generally speaking, a good return. How can an industry possibly hope to absorb 15, 25, 30% tariffs where what they have to play with is between 1 and 5%. So frankly, that doesn't wash with me. And yes, companies will have to do everything they can in their power and within their reach to be as competitive as it's possible to be. But you cannot subsidize the customer ad infinitum. It's a pure recipe for going out of business. If Britain wishes to buy South American meat, as some customers in Britain may do, inevitably, it will require them to park their food safety regulations, which they inputted so much to over 40 years membership of the EU, and it'll require them to put it on the shelf and ignore it, turn a blind eye. I don't see that happening. So I think we have to work with the customers in the UK, and nobody wants to talk about inflation. If you have a proactive supply chain who's doing absolutely everything it can to remain competitive, then a level of inflation will ultimately have to be borne by everybody in the supply chain. Okay. And that is all the way through to the customer. And folks, I just don't see any other way that that's going to happen. And 45 years of experience in the industry suggests to me I'm probably right. So forgive me. Everybody has to be pulling on the rope, and for a customer to say no inflation, we're ignoring what's going on, that's not sustainable in this day and age. No disrespect, Sharon. No, I didn't mean you. You were the exception to that rule.
Well, what we're going to do, that's some really interesting insights, and probably we could be talking for another 3 or 4 hours about this, but in the interest of time, we are going to take 2 questions from the audience. So I think we probably have microphones. I know that Orla Battersby is here from Enterprise Ireland. I don't know where she is. There she is there, okay. So I know that Orla has a question/comment for the panel. I'm not sure if you want to address it to one person or to anyone who volunteers.
Thanks, Donal. It's more, I suppose, more a comment to follow the panel's comments about competitiveness, which I know has come up as an emerging risk in the Barometer, I'm sure not for the first time. And I suppose it means a lot of things to a lot of people because of the myriad of factors as the Barometer report suggests. But from Enterprise Ireland's perspective, we look at it in a number of ways, everything from sort of the finance and funding and as we've been talking about currency management, tight currency management, to the people and skills and the people you have around you, right through into operational excellence. And I suppose as Larry just mentioned, there are a lot of things, and Philip, that can't be controlled. But I suppose we would really encourage companies to we have a relentless focus on the things they can. And just one example would be lean. And I know lean would be perhaps associated with the factory floor and being more efficient on the factory floor. But in fact, there are many companies, including companies in this room, who have adopted lean principles right throughout the business with great success. But I suppose one word of caution, and maybe the panel want to pick up on this is in really tightening the purse strings, understanding the reducing margins. It's particularly understandable at this point in time. But the whole area, and Tara's mentioned it, and I think Sharon mentioned as well, the whole area of spend on research and development and innovation can suffer. And we're seeing a reduction in our pipelines from R&D in Enterprise Ireland, which is particularly worrying. And I spoke to a CEO recently who was complaining that their CFO wouldn't release the budget for them to do R&D, and he was serious. So I suppose that short-term understandable reaction will have long-term impacts, I think, if companies adopt that approach, because as everybody here knows, particularly Board BA, the market-led innovation products is going to sustain your customers and grow new customers, and it is the future. Well,
it's the 3rd or 4th time that topic has come up today. And I don't know if you want to comment on that one.
It's an understandable factor of what we're facing at the moment. I mean, we've been talking about uncertainty from Brexit for all of our businesses for the last 3 years, with the expectation that there'd be light at the end of the tunnel come March of this year. Now we're looking at October, and we can take a poll as to what's going to happen in October, and probably none of us are going to be right. So, and that is your problem. And you're seeing that as long as the further that goes out, the more entrenched that companies and CFOs are probably going to be in this particular context. You would hope that it's still a short-term thing that we need to get over it. But I mean, you know, ultimately, Brexit has to end, and we have to know where we're going. We have to know how we can continue to do our business in the UK, which is fundamentally important to all of us. And UK is not going away as a market for any of us. And I think that you know, that would be my shout out at this stage, really. You know, that we do need an end to this, because we are going to see you know, collateral damage in a lot of our businesses as well, and innovation. And to Sharon's point, that she's expecting her suppliers to innovate, to be more efficient, which is lean technology, and to innovate. And innovation is going to help in terms of getting over some of the Brexit issues. But equally, Brexit is going to stall. And
by definition,
we have both
it's
issues.
a vicious kind of cycle. Yeah. Philip, I think you wanted to come in there.
Well, just to say, to answer the two things on research, there was an interesting presentation done by the OECD last week in the Department of Agriculture, and they mentioned in particular R&D as being one of the positives in the Irish economy in terms of the amount of investment that's done both at institutional and firm level in Ireland, and it compares very favourably right across the globe in their estimation. And maybe it has to do, as Anne maybe is suggesting, that, you know, people's focus is somewhere else just at the moment, but their focus will return to innovation. And we're doing it ourselves, as you well know, in terms of Meat Technology Ireland, where we have 6 different streams of research being undertaken at the moment, and we expect to see some innovative products and processes emerging from that over the course of the next couple of years. And the second thing is on the competitiveness thing, there are the 2 dimensions, the firm level competitiveness, and we've talked about that even in the context of supply chains, but also national competitiveness. And that's a big problem, you know, no matter what. You know, there are top line figures suggesting that our national competitiveness is on a par with many countries elsewhere, but industry is not feeling that. And there's one good example, which is the cost of insurance, public liability and employer liability insurance. And it's hit the headlines recently for all the wrong reasons. And it didn't hit the headlines when the right reasons were put forward for it. And they're obvious from, you know, the publicity it's got recently, that the awards are far too high. And they're far too high when you benchmark them against other countries. And there's something fundamentally flawed about the model we have in this country. And it is only because of adverse publicity in the political world that we're now beginning to see that there might be some response to that. It's helpful, but it was not the right reason. And it does not seem to me to be responsive to what industry has been calling for. And I think that's disappointing. And we have this across other areas, legal costs, energy costs, the cost of money, everything. We're not benchmarking good against many of our competitors. And government need to take a strong position. And what we have suggested to them is that they've had a very successful action plan for jobs, and it has been very successful. We can see unemployment levels now are down to 4.4%. It's extraordinary how the economy has returned. We need to do something like that for competitiveness.
Okay, well, the Minister is unfortunately not here to give his position or his government's position, but certainly that's a topic that I'm glad we're raising here in a public forum like this, and I'm sure there'll be other discussions and forums across the country over the next couple of months to raise those issues as well. So we'll just take one final question yes, we have a question here. Thank you very much. Fiona is just going to pass the microphone.
Hi, Vincent McGovern, IBEC. I just want to pick up on Anne's point there about Brexit has to end. This is probably more a personal observation rather than wearing my IBEC hat. Yes, Brexit has to end, but come the 31st of October or whatever date Brexit happens, surely that's just the end of the first phase of Brexit. Then it's what is the relationship between the European Union, Ireland and Brexit in Britain. The withdrawal agreement allows for a 2-year transition period to negotiate that, but 2 years to negotiate a trade deal is very, very, very tight. So, I mean, I've observed by other observers of the whole thing that we need to look towards the Switzerland model, what's happening between Switzerland and the EU, and it is a continuous negotiation, some certainty, but continuous negotiation. So, yes, Brexit has to end, but Brexit 31st of October, that's just the end of the first phase. Brexit is just going to continue.
Yeah, and thanks for the point of clarification on that, and I would completely agree with you. I think probably it is this phase of Brexit. I mean, the one thing about the much maligned withdrawal agreement is that it actually provided for a process and for a journey that we can go through, and we can go through relatively seamlessly from membership to a transitional agreement and that transitional agreement obviously is, I think it's probably going to be expanded in as long as it needs to be in terms of, so I wouldn't be worried about that, into a longer term trading arrangement, which has to be a comprehensive free trade agreement, which is as frictionless as possible. So you can see it had all the bricks that was there for moving from the UK being a member of the EU to us being able to continue to trade on relatively the same terms. And that's really what I was referring to in terms of the Brexit. We need to get to that stage but obviously it has to be within a negotiated and an agreed formula rather than a no-deal scenario, which really is not tenable. So sorry, that's really what I was trying to say, that we need to get I think we need to get into the transitional arrangement, and that will give us a bit of an indication of where the journey is. And it could take, Canadian one took 9 years, I all know that, yeah.
I wish we had more time to continue our discussion. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you to Larry and Libby and Philip. And I think they deserve a massive round of applause for their time.